Welcome back to Animal Crossing New Horizons. I'm Dear Darling. As you see what's going on a little island of Fawnhollow today, where we'll be relaxing as per usual. What are we going to do? Well, you know, this will probably be a little bit of a shorter episode. We'll see how things go necessarily, because I have my writing group with my friends immediately after this. So excuse me. So we'll have to see exactly, you know, when people start turning up, and then I've got to be like, oh, you know, got to pop out. Here we go, yo. What's a scenario? Anyway, good evening, everyone. Right now in Fawnhallow, it's 7:45 p.m. on Thursday, July 20th, 2023. Label, the Able Sisters is here. I don't really know what we're going to talk about today, to be perfectly honest. It's sort of just like, we're vibing with it, we're relaxing, we're hanging, chilling, all cool, shooting some b-ball outside of school. I feel like I always go back to like those ones when I'm trying to find something to vamp with, and I don't mean vampire. I don't know, what can we talk about today? I'm not sure, you know. Did I mention at some point I actually bought a subscription to Dropout TV, which is that College Humor sort of like streaming platform, just because I wanted to see all the Game Changer, all the Make Some Noise thingamabobs, you know, and it surprises me actually. There's actually quite a decent amount of content on there for, you know, price comparison. Like, obviously, you know, I don't think it's an infinite trove that Netflix is, but Netflix also, you know, there's not many things on Netflix I actually want to watch. So, yeah, I bought a subscription to Dropout TV. Would I regret it? Maybe. I don't know. It was only a year and it was discounted anyway, so I was like, whatever. You know, like £40 or something for an entire year. It's not the worst deal in the world. It's like, what, £3.50 or something a year? It's pretty good, to be honest. For entertainment. Well, you know, as far as things go. And, you know, I'm making my way through. I'm making my way through the videos, and they're pretty fun to watch. And I mean, I've talked about some of them before. Like, I talked about one of them, which was uploaded to the College Humor YouTube channel, if you want to check out for yourself. But Play It By Ear, which is basically like an improvised musical. I can't remember when exactly I talked about it, nor what title it is, but it's something like improvised musical. You know, one thing I also need to do is I need to send my actual writing group thing to the chat, so, you know, just to be like, hey, I've actually done something. There we go. This is actually when I did. I'm not sure if I think I did finish it for the original day that we were going to have this writing group for. I just, like, you know, it was a bit rushed and I didn't particularly like it, and then in the next 2 weeks I refined it, but, you know, it's been delayed once again to today, where I have made a few small changes here and there, but, you know, not that much. And honestly, I'm not too jazzed about my own writing prompt this time. You might be like, what's it about? It's well, I'll give you the prompt words. The prompt words are abandoned, happiness and flowers. So what I did is basically some sort of, it's kind of like a creation story of a character. It's like a meta creation story, kind of, not of a human's life or anything, but of a human, I suppose, quote having a creation, I suppose, of their own story, or not their own story, their own character, of a made-up character in a story, and it's kind of like a creation story for them, in some sort of like weird meta way. And honestly, you know, I like the concept better than my actual execution. I suppose, like, it was a bit of a difficult one to write, because it's basically a conversation between a character and a narrator. So when anything the narrator narrates, a character hears as well, and it's like you kind of have to suspend your disbelief, because it doesn't make sense, because this person's writing it. I guess it would make sense as an oral story, but then the rest of the story doesn't make sense. I don't know. It's like I can sort of imagine it as like a, you know, a YouTube short or something, like a few minute YouTube short, but I don't think it's worked particularly well as a story. But, you know, I'm not going to, like, undo it. I'm not going to, like, delete it and be like, no, you can't see this because I'm unhappy with it. You know, then by showing it, you know, maybe someone else really likes it. But also maybe, you know, I can get some more inspiration about what I could have done instead. You know, but again, that's the beauty of these groups, where you can get your own criticisms. You can find out things which people liked and people didn't like. You might be like, why can I read a story? I still have not done that thing where I said I was going to do, where I was going to upload all my stories to a place. I don't even know what website I would use. I don't know what the go-to one is. I'm sure that will happen eventually. It's kind of like lower down on the list of priorities, to be perfectly honest. But I do intend to share it. I mean, I don't think I like again, I'm not like an amazing writer or anything. I'm just kind of doing it for a hobby, or like amateurish. No, not even amateur, like novice-ish or something. It's just kind of like for fun, you know. I've not taken any like writing lessons. Anything I have to do with like which would help me in writings are just like things I've learned about like character and story building, I suppose, which tends to be more things related to like D&D campaigns or ideation of that, or like theoretical stories and like analyses of like media properties of stories, right? But I don't want to turn this into another writing group, you know, conversation thing, but I guess here we are again. Oh, it was a good life beetle. I don't really know what necessarily to say about it, I suppose. I mean, I guess, you know, a lot of things you just got to try it, to be honest. I don't know what number story this is, nor how much I've necessarily improved over my time writing stories. I've probably improved. I would say I've definitely improved, like, compared to my first, like, 4 or something. But I feel like I've very much stagnated, probably, within the last, like, 5 or something. I don't think they're noticeably better or worse than any of the previous ones. And that's probably because I'm not really doing any sort of, like, active learning, active training. Or, well, I'm not sure training is really the right word, but active, like, pushing my boundaries, like, sitting there analysing. Well, okay, I do analyse it, but I'm not analysing it necessarily in that deeper sense, because again, I'm not spoken to like industry professionals is like really right way, but I'm not taking advice necessarily from professionals. I've already taken it from my friends who, to be fair, you know, some of them are certainly better writers than me, and they all contribute a very unique perspective and valid criticisms, but it's not like it's sort of like the thing. I mean, I guess to use like a drawing analogy, you know, I've just been drawing. I've not been like thinking about form. I've not been like looking up videos to like how to practice proportions or foreshortening or pushing my limits in that sort of regard. I'm just sort of just like writing. And there's nothing wrong with that, honestly. There's nothing wrong with that. Not everything needs to be, I suppose, a lesson in mastery. Which I suppose is very ironic coming from me, because that's kind of how I approach most things. Is like, do things to become better. Otherwise, you know, I don't learn. If there's no improvement, there's no fun. I suppose it's something I've kind of like learned about myself, is the fact that I'm a lot more achievement oriented than I expected myself to be. Despite the fact that it's weird, because I'm not competitive, but I am achievement oriented, which is like a very weird combination. I think of things. But it's also, I don't really see myself as a person who needs like a huge amount of external validation or something. I guess it's all kind of internal, probably. So if anything, the only competition I have is with myself, which is fine, but also it means that I suppose there's no external hold keeping my interest on things if I'm just like, you know, there's no motivation outside of it and there's no motivation for it outside of the improvement side of it, I suppose, which is, I don't know, maybe that's a bit reductive, maybe that is, maybe that isn't. But anyway, I suppose we should probably be talking like vaguely about the story. It's not like a very meta story, which is, I mean, my ideation of it to begin with was like, is this going to be a story? Like, a lot of the times when I'm like coming up with ideas of my stories, I'd be like, you should write a story without like some deeper meaning behind it, because all of my stories turn into something with deeper meaning. But you know, which I'm not saying that's bad necessarily, but it's not really pushing my own boundaries, I suppose. And I'm relying on a crux of coming up with like this concept or greater concept I want to convey first, rather than necessarily testing my actual prose or writing skills from nothing. Because while I certainly think the art of writing does get elevated with meaning behind it, you know, certainly like if you read a story, then you read a story which helps, when you compared to reading like exact same level of technical writing in the story, but has like a meaning behind it, or like is conveying a point, or conveying you, or urging you to think or reflect on an idea. I'd imagine people find one with meaning more appealing in that sense, because it's kind of one which sticks with you. It's sort of like eating food which has calories and is nutritious, doesn't taste bad or anything, compared to food which actually has flavour, right? So I'm not saying it's a bad thing that necessarily my stories, that I feel like I use meaning or like morals, I suppose, of a story as a crutch compared to something else entirely. But I feel like it doesn't really test my technical writing ability. You know, it doesn't test my like usage of like, oh, you know, should it be written in this way? Is the structure good? You know, does it feel like it's got a form behind it? Like if all my stories, I suppose, basically rely on a moral sort of backbone at the end of the day, if you take that away, then it has no substance to it in the first place, which I don't think I feel like is not necessarily the sign of a great story. I feel like a story, if you take away its moral fibre, I suppose, or if you take away the meaning it's conveying, it should still, a good story would still be good, you know? It wouldn't be good in the sense that it gets you to reflect on, like, you know, the nature of humanity or anything, but it would be, like, pleasant to read, I suppose. You know, it's sort of like a mechanically pleasant story, which is not, I don't think it's necessarily often a metric you judge a story by, but if you're trying to break a story down into multiple parts, you know, you kind of have to, because the writing, or anything in general, is not defined. I mean, it's evaluated, I suppose, on its whole, but it's not defined by its whole. You know, you kind of got to kind of like analyze it under the critical lens of its different components as well. You know, because otherwise you'll just be like, oh, you have someone who's like amazing at writing, like story building, but terrible at writing characters, just being like, why are my stories so mediocre? Well, you know, if you just be like, you know, you're technically very good at writing stories or something, and that's as deep as you go with your evaluation, you'll never get into the meat and potatoes of it, being like, I love the world you're building up, but I hate your characters, or something like that, which can be obviously a sort of like action point for you to be able to go and reflect on your story and, you know, improve yourself, right? Now, I'm saying this as if you were someone who is disagreeing with me. I don't mean that. And I'm constructing like a theoretical straw man in my head who's arguing against my points. But, well, not even arguing, but like I suppose I'm just having a one-sided discussion here, which is not normally how discussions usually work. But yeah. Anyway, sort of like meta stories. You know, like, what do I think in general about meta stories? I'm going to spoil some things like here, because it's kind of hard to talk about meta stories, I suppose, without spoiling the meta-y nature of them. Like, basically, any game which I played on my channel is now fair game to be spoiled, so I apologise for, you know, even hinting there might be a spoiler, there might even be a meta element, but I guess I'll talk, you know, I'll just bring up all the games now. So Undertale, One Shot, Doki Doki Literature Club come to mind as like meta breaking sort of stories, video game wise, that is. Undertale obviously kind of has like the meta element baked into what it actually is, where it's kind of like a subversion of an RPG genre in general, and it plays on expectations of the player themselves to have their own expectations, and then it toys with them. You know, like the idea of like, oh, you had to defeat every enemy in battle to continue on in RPG, which obviously gets subverted. You know, the whole idea of tutorialization with a tutorial character, but you don't actually learn anything for tutorial because she does everything for you. You know, things like that. As much as Undertale is my favourite game, it's not necessarily a game I'd recommend to people if you've never played a video game before. As much as I love it, I feel like it's a game which really, because of its meta sort of element, because of its meta nature built into the very core of its system, not the core of its system, but the core of its story, it kind of makes it like pointless to experience, I think, if you've not played games before, right? That's just my own personal thing. Like, I think you can obviously still enjoy it, but I feel like it gets heightened by your understanding of being used to games. So it's sort of the sort of thing like I would recommend you play a different RPG first, or like, you know, once you're more familiar with RPGs, you get the best experience on playing Undertale. But if you want to play it, just play it anyway. Like, who cares about the optimal way, or viewing order, playing order? These sort of things can go right out the window. One Shot obviously is a very sort of meta game, which honestly maybe I should have thought about more when it came to writing the story, because One Shot, if you don't know, you have a character, Nico, who actually kind of directly communicates with you, the player, in a one-sided conversation, because you can't really say much back from what I recall, but it's very meta in that sense. And I think it plays around with it reasonably well. Like, it's kind of its whole concept, I suppose, is also mechanically very baked into the idea of its meta nature of a game, right? It's one where I believe the origin of the game, like why it's called One Shot, is you had to beat the game in one shot, otherwise Nico would perish, or something like that. Obviously, that's not something which translates very well to a game mechanic, which people like to enjoy. And most people don't want to sit down and play an RPG game for like 8 hours, and while it certainly is a bold statement to keep that as a core mechanic, if they did, it's not something which I think most people would want to do. Okay, so it's also almost becoming o'clock time for oh my god, it's becoming o'clock time for the start of a writing group. So, you know, I'm gonna just keep an eye on anyone joining the Discord channel, and you know, two people are already in there. So I'll wrap this up in a couple of minutes, but I just want to finish this trailer 4, I suppose. These meta elements. Oh, hello, Scorpion. Yeah, so they're very meta stories, those two. And Doki Doki Literature Club is meta in a different way, where it's like built into a mechanic as well. It's kind of like I'm not really sure how to describe Doki Doki Literature Club. It's free if you haven't played it. You can play it. It's sort of like a horror meta subversion game, which, you know, indie horror go hand in hand. Excuse me. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. You know, I enjoy Doki Doki Literature Club. It's a lot of reading though, and it's kind of like a visual novel subversion. So you know, if it's not your type of game, it's not your type of game, is what I can really say. And the horror elements are, I'd put them on the tier of like, there's only like one jump scare, I think, or two in the game. It's creepy more than anything, and there are some like, you know, horror-esque scenes, but they're not extreme. They're not like, oh my god, like traumatizing, I suppose. And well, at least I wouldn't personally say so. They're kind of like something you might see from like a horror movie, maybe. So, I mean, if you don't like that genre, then you don't like that genre. Is all I can really say. But it plays around with meta elements as well, with it being like the nature of it being a game. And I wonder, you know, does it work, these meta sort of narratives work better in a game compared to like a story or like a movie or something? I suppose the interactive nature of games, the video games themselves, help lend to that meta feeling, because a lot of the times meta elements, they kind of have to, well, they don't have to, but they kind of interact with the player in the first place, right? And not interacting with them is, I'm not going to say not meta, but it's sort of like there's added immersion, I suppose, when the interactivity goes sort of both ways, rather than just, you know, a pre-recorded thing with a reader watching. But I also suppose that things like books and movies and these sort of things, which are sort of set in stone before well, I mean, I guess video games also set in stone before a player plays it, but what I mean is they more have like meta elements rather than breaking fourth wall in a sense of being like, hey, I'm going to talk to a player or talk to a viewer. They have meta elements where, you know, they play around with a meta of expectations surrounding that media property or art form in the first place, right? I don't know. I wonder if there's analysis. I wonder what the best meta media property is anyway. Anyway, I'm going to have this episode up here because more friends are joining that. So, you know, we'll see how it goes. And, you know, what do I think of my story overall? I'd give it like a distinct 5 out of 10 out of stories I've written. I think it's very average. Somewhere in 4 to 5. I don't particularly like it that much, but I don't think it's horrible. And remember, I do use a full 1 to 10 scale when I rate my things. Which of my stories is a 1? Probably the second story I've written. It's not very good, I'm going to be honest. Anyway, I'm going to have this episode off here, so if you have been watching, thank you very much. So Animal Crossing New Horizons, I've been Dear Darling. Likes, comments, subscription, shares, greatly appreciated. Twitter, Discord down below. Hope you see each other again, but for now, it's our farewell. So until next time, bye-bye for now.